Hello and welcome to this week's myNewsWrap, news from the world of SAP, Microsoft and the world in between. Let's get started first with SAP. There I have one news topic for you, and that's the DSAG investment report. So the German-speaking user group of SAP usually brings out a report at the beginning of the year where it did a survey with the members of DSAG around the investment within the IT departments of the members. So where do they have their center of gravity? Where do they de-invest? And usually also having some questions around hot topics that are currently important for SAP. Like in this edition of 2022, Rise with SAP. And I have referenced the press note, the press release around that investment report. There are also some insights with respect how the budget is spent. So there is an increase in budget over the last years, and it also shows where it is put at. So is it still Business Suite? Is it S4? What type of S4 is it? Different cloud solutions by SAP like SuccessFactors or something like that, which obviously seems to have quite some traction. And then what's also interesting is the topic of Rise with SAP and how familiar the members of the German-speaking SAP user group are with Rise with SAP, and that's really not cool. So the survey was done with DSAG and with ASAC, so also with the American-speaking user group, and the majority of the members has heard of Rise with SAP, but are not really familiar with it. And that's really the big majority. And there are also some that have never heard of Rise with SAP. So quite some work to do for SAP, I would say, on that topic. With that, yeah, I'm already through with news from the world of SAP. So perhaps one side remark, there was the Kima update that happened last weekend. So now basically every Kima runtime should now be on the open source release 2.0.4 or 5 or something like that. But nothing new there. I had all the blog post referenced before. Then let's switch to Microsoft. And of course, first thing serverless. And there I would like to highlight the weekly video series of Sheree the Grey around serverless, and this time with Stacey Cashmore as guest talking about how to migrate to serverless. So what is the decision-making process? How do you prepare your management, your organization for that? How do you educate the team in order to have a really smooth transition to that area? Again, cool video, check it out, and I would say subscribe to Sheree the Grey. Then some announcements around Azure Functions and in general Azure apps. There are some deprecation notes. So the support for Microsoft.NET Core 3.1 will end at the 3rd of December this year. So that's not too far away. So if you are running Azure Functions with .NET Core 3.1, then make sure that until that point in time you have migrated them over to .NET 6, which also means that you have to upgrade the runtime version from 3.x to 4.x. Now, the same is true for functions or in general apps that are running on Node 14. Node 14 is one of the long-term support releases, but the community support will end next year at the 30th of April, which means there's a bit more time than for the .NET functions, but nevertheless, make sure to upgrade ahead of time. Currently, the next LTS release is Node 16. And well, as usual, there are some informations in those deprecation blog posts, but I think the path forward is quite clear. With that, Let's switch over to the container world, first starting with the, let's say, serverless containers, namely Azure Container Apps. And there are two cool blog posts that crossed my path this week. One by Jason Haley on how to roll back container app revisions using the Azure CLI. So that's quite important if you're using container apps and you make use of revisions. You might want or you might have an issue with one revision and want to roll back to the previous one. And this blog post guides you through. There's also a previous one on how to do that with the portal UI. This one focuses on the CLI, giving you some different aspects on how to do that with respect to how to quickly change traffic to go back to the old revision, or to get the traffic to the old revision and instantaneously deactivate the new vision, and so on. So that's, I think, super useful blog post around the topic of Azure Container Apps. And there is also another one by Thorsten Hans about custom health probes. So if you are working with Kubernetes, you probably know that you have the option to have custom health probes for your nodes or for your pods, which show if the pod is still alive, if the pod is ready, and also there is a startup probe, which makes perfect sense. And that's something that you can do within Kubernetes, to do that with custom probes. And you can do the same for Azure Container Apps. So there is the option to do that and to specify the probes with respect to your YAML file. So that's quite cool, and this blog post guides you through on how to do that. And now switching over to real containers, real Kubernetes, so to say. There is one talk that I would like to highlight by Nico Meisenzahl that was held at the Azure Meetup Zurich and was thankfully streamed, about the Azure Kubernetes service, giving you some insights about the, let's say, the highlights of the Azure Kubernetes service, and also what you have to consider when you use it. So a super useful talk by Nico. And if you watch the video, there is a whole series out there for AKS at the Azure Zurich meetup. So there have been, I think that was the 4th or the 5th one. There have been previous ones, and there are more to come. So definitely worth subscribing and checking out those videos, because they are really, really useful. Then going on with the deprecation notice. So that's kind of the motto of this week, so it seems. This time Azure Container Monitoring. This is now really even later than the ones that I mentioned before for the Azure Functions. Azure Container Monitoring will be retired in March 2025. So there are 3 years ahead, but there is probably more to do for you in order to transition to the successor, namely Azure Monitor Container Insights, which is the successor. And the Azure Container Monitoring service will be completely retired at that point in time. The update note that I have referenced within the show note gives you some more information, and also some more links with respect to further information on that topic. Then from the broader Kubernetes ecosystem, there I have 3 news around Dapper. First of all, a blog post by Jeff Hollan around more or less a point of view on Dapper and how he perceives Dapper. And I think that's quite fitting. The blog post is titled "Dapper is like jQuery for microservices." So this is kind of a new evolution step for microservices if you model or combine them or make use of Dapper in order to implement your microservices. And this blog post gives you a bit of an insight on why this is the case and why this comparison is quite fitting. It's a really interesting blog post. Then one update notice from Dapper with respect to the documentation. there has been some updates around the quick starts. So the quick starts have been revamped, and they now really focus on individual building blocks in different languages. So that's now the quick starts, and the former quick starts have been moved to tutorials. Having said that, this was also mentioned in this week's Dapper community call that took place, but that was not the only thing that was mentioned there. There was also one interesting contribution around how open functions make use of Dapper and of Kida. But focus, of course, was Dapper within this community call, and how it makes life even easier for people using open functions in conjunction with Dapper. With that, let's switch over to DevOps. First of all, one announcement from HashiCorp with respect to Terraform for Azure. The Azure RM Resource Manager 3.0 brings now, first of all, enhanced support for Azure Functions, but also a lot of other news that come with this new release. So all of them are listed within the blog post that I've referenced within the show notes, and even more. So there are deeper links in there. What you have to think about is that Terraform kind of abstracts away the ARM templates or the ARM API that Azure exposes and puts on an own layer, which is in the best sense handcrafted. So whenever there are changes underneath within Azure, Terraform really has to do something. And this new release now really brings a lot of great features that now support the latest and greatest within Azure and the setup of resources there. Then GitHub. Let's switch to GitHub with the area of DevOps. First thing first, if you have been using GitHub for the last few weeks in March, you didn't have not always fun, because there have been a lot of service disruptions this month. And the blog post that I've referenced within the show notes gives you an update on the recent service disruptions. As far as I have seen, all of them have been connected to the database, and there have been quite some outages. So that was not so cool, and this blog post is quite transparent on that, and also gives a glance forward with respect what are the next steps there. So I really highly appreciate the openness, but hopefully the next steps also will improve things a lot, because that was not so great this month. Nevertheless, there are also a lot of new features that came out for GitHub. First of all, a changelog blog post that I've referenced within the show notes about GitHub issues, which gives you an overview what happened within the last month on GitHub issues. So what's new there, what options you have. I think I have covered them all in previous sessions, but nevertheless, it's always good to have a little bit of a wrap up there. And then on the same topic, there is a blog post from the product side of GitHub, from the product group, on how to start working on GitHub issues faster. So how to best implement the flow around GitHub issues with your overall development or bug fixing flow. And this blog post kind of guides you through what's the best practices there. Then some information about GitHub Actions, some best practices around how to secure self-hosted runners. So if you're using self-hosted runners in order to execute your GitHub Actions, how to secure them with respect to setting limits that those self-hosted runners can only be accessed from specific workflows within your organization or enterprise. So that's, I think, quite useful. And then there's also a new feature introduced for the GitHub Enterprise server, so the on-prem version that came out last week, or was made GA last week in version 3.4. And with this new release, there is now an improved capability there to cache your repository. you probably need that when you are using monorepos and have very heavy read traffic on those monorepos. And this read traffic also comes from distributed locations. Then this repository cache can help you. It gives you really a cache which is eventually consistent. So you have to keep that in mind. And the blog post that I've referenced there guides you through this feature, and also gives you an information about the known issues around caching with the GitHub Enterprise Server 3.3 and 3.4. So the latest and the one before. And then another feature, small but I think super useful, which was rolled out in beta this week, is you can now follow organizations. So up to now you could follow users, but now you can also follow organizations. This announcement kind of tells you that that's possible and gives you some further information what you can do with that. With that, let's switch a bit to more generic news around Microsoft. And there is one source that I would like to highlight from the Microsoft documents that I think is super useful. And that's a checklist for architecting and building multi-tenant solutions on Azure. Of course, taking from a methodology point of view, the Azure Well-Architected Framework as a baseline, and the pillars that come along with that methodology, and gives you a very short and crisp overview or checklist what you have to consider from a business perspective, from reliability, resilience, from a security point of view, and cost optimization and ops. So that's really great. And of course also performance efficiency. And this checklist also contains a lot of further deep links that give you more information on specific aspects like pricing or something like that. So I think super valuable, and also could be a blueprint even if you're not explicitly working on Azure. Maybe then some things are not one-to-one transferable, but it's always good to have something like a checklist if you build something like that. And then another blog post by GitHub, nevertheless focusing on nothing super GitHub specific, but on security topics, on OWASP topics. So from the security part of the blog posting area at GitHub, on how to validate your input within your UIs and so on. And how to improve security with this input validation based on the OWASP proactive control. So also I think quite useful blog post on that topic. And then last but not least, one blog post only available in German and not super new, but it crossed my path this week around Microsoft Viva, giving you some review, some summary of what happened at the last year with Microsoft Viva. I think it was a bit quiet around that topic, or at least I didn't come across a lot of news, but I think this is a super powerful offering by itself, but also in combination with SAP. So this is, I would expect there much more traffic around there with respect how to combine Microsoft Viva with SAP like SuccessFactors or something like that. And this blog post kind of guides you through what happened in the last year and how things are moving forward. With that, I would like to switch to the world in between SAP and Microsoft. And let's start with another review by Microsoft that came out this week about Rise with SAP. So picking up the story from the very beginning. Of course, focusing on Rise with SAP on the Microsoft Cloud. So what happened in the last year? What success stories came out? And there is one sentence that is put in bold, but I did not directly stumble across that in this blog post. And that's about Microsoft being the first public cloud provider that will adopt Rise with SAP for its internal transformation. So Microsoft will take RISE with SAP. That surprised me a bit. So there is also a blog post or a news from SAP in the SAP News Center about Microsoft selecting RISE with SAP to drive business innovation. So Microsoft will move over to RISE. That's kind of, I didn't expect that. And to be honest, I don't know what the consequences will be with respect to drink your own champagne with SAP on Azure. So I don't know if there are implications. I would think so. I'm curious to see how things move forward there and how the experience will be of Microsoft when using RISE with SAP. With that, of course, as every week, there is... This news was also picked up, of course, by the SAP on Azure podcast by Holger Buchelt. And of course, as every week, there is a new edition of that one. And this time focusing on customer solutions and the customer incubation team of Microsoft and how they help customers in going forward with Microsoft. Yeah, presenting all things around that and how that support works. Okay, then let's switch into the world of learning and announcements for events. There is one thing that I would like to highlight around learning, and that's by Golo Roden, who brought out a 120-minute video, so more than 2 hours even, around Kubernetes. So it's a complete 2-hour introduction into Kubernetes, starting from the very beginning and going down the path as far as you can go within 2 hours. But it really gives you a great overview on that topic. So if you are new to Kubernetes and if you're speaking German, then definitely watch this one, put this on your watch list and walk through it because it's great. Then 3 announcements around events that are upcoming. First things first, I already said that the community conference around the Cloud Application Programming Model, so RECAP, will be happening again in 2022 as a hybrid event. And there is now a call for sessions or a call for papers, however you want to call that. So if you have a talk around your experience with CAP, move forward and provide that to the team in order to have a great conference there. What puzzled me a bit was that there is only one session type, which is a drive-by talk, which is a 20 minutes talk, but with heavily focusing on demo as all the talks within RECAP are. But if there is only one session type, why do you have the option to choose it if you can only choose one? But maybe there are more session types coming up. I have no idea. I didn't see that in the tweet that announced that. But yeah, if you want to give a drive-by talk, you have the form linked within my show notes. And then there is one other event from Microsoft about modernizing and migrating with hybrid cloud. So how to modernize and bring forward your solutions, be it Java, be it .NET, whatsoever. It's, I think, a 2-hour session around those topics with a lot of well-known folks like Jeff Holland. I think quite interesting, 2 well-spent hours at the mid of April. And then last event that I would like to highlight this week is IstioCon. So if you're using Istio as your service mesh within Kubernetes, then there is the Istio conference happening at the end of April. And you can register now for that conference. And with that, last section for today, namely developer experience. And Jan de Dobler, who is the inventor, creator, maintainer of Oh My Posh, now also brought out a blog where he highlights the news around Oh My Posh, of course. which turned 6 years now. That's really incredible. And this is kind of the first blog post that will continuously highlight the news. Biggest news this week was that there is swag now available. So you can have shirts and stickers for that. And there are, of course, some technical updates around Oh My Posh that are highlighted within that blog post. Looking forward to more to come in that area. And with that, I'm at the end of today's session. I hope I had some news for you, some useful stuff to catch up with. And with that, I wish you a nice Saturday, a great Sunday, and a very successful next week. See you next Saturday. Until then, bye.